You've anticipated what's about to happen. Welcome all to this Policy in Practice seminar, which this week is on citizenship education. My name is Alan Rennick. I'm Professor of Democratic Politics. I forgot for a moment there, but I'm Professor of Democratic Politics here in the UCL Department of Political Science. And the Policy in Practice seminar series is hosted by the Department of Political Science and School of Public Policy here in UCL. And I'm delighted that this particular evening's event is also co-hosted by the UCL Constitution Unit, where I am also Deputy Director. So our topic for this week, as I've said, is citizenship education. We're asking the question, is citizenship education up to scratch? And one reason that that is a very topical question is up there on the board in the title for the session. The UK government is introducing votes at 16 in elections in the next year or two, and therefore it's all the more important for us to consider whether young people are being effectively prepared to enable them to participate effectively in our democratic politics. But I guess in an era of rampant misinformation and polarization and very widespread disillusionment and disengagement from traditional politics, conventional politics, there are many other reasons also for considering how we enable people to participate effectively in politics and what the role of citizenship education in that may be. So I'm looking forward to a really fantastic discussion this evening, and we're joined by three wonderful speakers who will be exploring these matters. And I will introduce them in the order in which they will make their opening comments. So Hans Svenevig will start us off, and he is the subject leader for the Citizenship PGCE in the UCL Institute of Education, the IUE, and also a trustee of the Association for Citizenship Teaching. Emma Connolly is a research fellow here in the UCL Department of Political Science, based at the Digital Speech Lab, where she is leading research on digital civic education. And nearest to me, Hattie Andrews is the founder of the Politics Project, which develops creative and interactive programs that empower young people to use their voice. At least that's what they say. We'll maybe explore further what they do. If you want more information about the speakers, there are longer bios on the web page for this evening. So we'll start with opening comments from each of the speakers, then we'll have a bit of a conversation among ourselves, and then we will finally open the floor to your questions. So do be thinking about what questions you might want to put as you're listening to the speakers. Before we begin, I should just mention, and if you're a regular at these seminars, you will be used to this, but it's important to note that the whole session is being recorded. And so I'm just thinking, the usual text here says that if you speak, you will be heard. So you should be aware of that when deciding whether you want to speak or not. So you'll be heard on the recording. In fact, it turns out that this evening we have in the room only one functioning microphone. So it may be that, in fact, we do not send the microphone round for the Q&A, but let's get there when we get there. In any case, we are being recorded this evening, and the video will be posted on the department's website, our YouTube channel, and our podcast feed after the event. So do encourage others who weren't able to come today to pick up those. But without further ado, I will hand over to Hans, who will be our first speaker.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Alan and the UCL Constitution Unit for having this session. I want to get some audience participation immediately. Let's ask the question, do you think citizenship education is up to scratch? Put your hand up if you think it is. And that's exactly what I think too. And I'm the subject leader of Citizenship PGCE, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So, no, citizenship education is not up to scratch to prepare people for votes at 16. Citizenship education is, in fact, in dire shortage. And this impacts all children very negatively across the country. Only 5% of schools deliver citizenship GCSE. Think about that. In the entire country, only 5% deliver GCSE citizenship. As the Association of Citizenship Teaching highlights, from evidence from several university research projects, high-quality, well-sequenced citizenship education equips young people with the knowledge, the skills, and the confidence to participate fully in democratic life and to develop confidence in their own voice. Research shows that those who sit the GCSE, those 5%, demonstrate stronger political knowledge, greater engagement with current affairs, and an increased confidence in navigating politics and democratic processes. Now, things are set to improve. The Curriculum and Assessment Review has said that citizenship education will increase. The government's response to the Curriculum and Assessment Review is favourable and will put citizenship into the primary curriculum. So then I should be happy, right? And everything is done and we don't need to worry about it anymore. But academies don't teach it. Now, there is a current bill going through Parliament, the Children's Schools and Wellbeing Bill, that if it's made into law will make all academies teach the national curriculum. That would mean that all academies would have to teach citizenship. And at the moment, they don't all teach citizenship in the way that I would like them to do that. So in theory, that should solve the problem. But there's a dire shortage of specialist teachers of citizenship. So if we're planning to make sure that all children have strong political education, they have democratic, legal, and economic education, as the Curriculum Assessment Review wants us to have in 2028 and onwards, if we're trying to get students to learn about oracy and about debate, trying to get students to understand how to interact with media, digital literacy, thinking about AI, thinking about influencers, thinking about all these things, we need specialist teachers of citizenship. It seems obvious. This year, there are only 2 providers in the entire country of university-based teacher education in citizenship. Only 2. UCL Institute of Education, the subject I teach, Citizenship PGC, is the only one in the whole country. There are only 30 specialist teachers of citizenship being trained this year. 30. If you take RE, which is not in the national curriculum currently, there's about 150. That shows the dire shortage that we have. There's no bursary for citizenship education, and there hasn't been for a very long time, since the curriculum subject was introduced in 2002. So there's no bursary. So take a socio-economic situation. You want to have more people teaching citizenship, yet there's no bursary for it. So is it up to scratch? Is citizenship education up to scratch? Absolutely not. There are more teachers in a small secondary school than there are in the entire country learning how to teach citizenship and do it properly. In 25 years, there's only 2,000 trained specialists of citizenship education. In 25 years. Why are specialists important? So I'm a citizenship specialist. Imagine if I taught maths. That would be dire. That would be a really big problem. I'm terrible at maths. I can sort of do some things, but I only got a C at maths. So that would be a problem, right? So why are we asking non-specialists to teach such a complicated subject, where we're asking them to teach about how to debate controversial issues in schools, engage young people in local politics, think about the economy, think about all these complicated subjects, think about critical media literacy? Why are we asking non-specialists to do those things? We need specialists to teach about local community politics. Demos, in a recently released report last week or the week before, I can't remember exactly, talked about inside the mind of a 16-year-old. Inside the mind of a 16-year-old, young people do not feel listened to, valued, or engaged, and we need to change that. We need high-quality citizenship education delivered by specialists. As the report states, the danger is not that this generation has given up on democracy. It's that if nothing changes, they might stop believing democracy can work for them at all. So we must value people. We must value young people. And yet, regularly, I hear the same tired, problematic views about voter reform. I'm going to share some of them with you. They don't have a desire to vote. Introducing the reform would weaken democracy. The voter franchise is already enough to represent the views of those who do not have it. They are emotional creatures and incapable of making a sound political decision. I bet these sound slightly familiar. That's because those were the same arguments used 100 years ago to prevent women getting the vote. The real barriers for young people to vote at 16 is not a lack of maturity or desire. It's not because they are less informed. In fact, they're hyper-informed and more informed often than adults, and we need to learn about that. The very serious problem is children and young people need to feel valued and given information that connects with them and therefore with real, meaningful student voice. To do that, we need significantly more specialist teachers of citizenship education. So is citizenship education up to scratch? No. Could it be? Should it be? Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hans. We shall move straight to Emma.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Alan, for the introduction. So just to think about some of those stats there that you mentioned, it is really worrying, especially with regards to specialist teachers, and that is complicated still by the problem of digital literacy and social media, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about in my opening address. When we talk about citizenship education, we often think of it in a formal setting, and that's certainly what the curriculum review has set out to address. We think about young people learning politics, processes, and we think of that setting in the classroom. And whilst these things are super important, the reality is that young people are receiving lots of their political content from social media. And this is a space that if we don't get this right, then you can do all the curriculum review in the world and you can address it formally, but actually this is a massive part of also addressing it. So the reality is that much of what young people learn about politics happens through social media, and this presents a real tension because we also know, or research suggests, that social media platforms can be really effective spaces for young people to shape their political views, their civic voices, and there's so much potential through doing this on social media. The problem is that this is often being done outside of school settings without any kind of formal mediation from teachers, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. The other issue with that is obviously lots of content that young people are accessing online, especially political content, can be harmful. It is a well-trodden kind of area of research that misinformation, disinformation, the use of AI, deepfakes, these things are not going away, and they pose a real threat to democratic integrity. So this is one of the really big challenges that like young people and political participation face. So I think one of the main challenges is that our systems of civic education have not really kept pace with the reality of how young people are potentially engaging in politics with political content, and we're struggling to capitalise on the benefits that can kind of foster or entail, but also we're struggling to do anything to mitigate some of the negative consequences of that as well. So it's a really tricky situation where we've got this tool, social media is this tool that could be used for lots of good, but obviously there are lots and lots of challenges to doing that. The current civic curriculums seem to still be designed largely for an era where information and authority was far more centralised. So thinking about kind of mass media or kind of mainstream media channels where most people were or have been receiving their information, this is now so fragmented. It's happening very quickly. Young people are receiving and absorbing content rapidly, and therefore it's really difficult to do anything about it. So even the most recent curriculum review, which is fantastic in that it sets out recommendations for addressing things like misinformation, disinformation, and the use of AI, but it does this in kind of subject areas, maybe as has already been pointed out, to be delivered perhaps by non-specialist teachers. The other challenge is that in schools, the reality is that phones are neither seen nor heard, or that's the policy, or phones are being locked away, and of course I can see why, but students are using them anyway. When we've gone into schools and we've spoken to young people, they're engaging. They're using their phones. They're kind of engaging with this content. So there seems to be a bit of a discord between the types of open, transparent conversations that we want to have with young people about these themes to do with digital literacy, and creating spaces in which that can happen quite openly. And I think that's an issue, alongside the fact that we've got non-specialists, or potentially going to have non-specialists teaching as well. And that's not through any fault of teachers. If you've got a teacher that's been teaching for 30 years, now been asked to suddenly address issues of mis and disinformation or AI and deepfakes without having any formal training on the topic, perhaps not having used social media, or at least kind of current or emerging forms of social media, maybe perhaps without kind of really understanding the mechanisms through which all of this content is being circulated, that's a real challenge. And it's not one that's easy to address. And I think in terms of implementation, that's going to really have to be something that is factored in. Having said that, there are lots of really amazing things happening in the digital civic space. There are lots of different organisations, and they are all, in schools, looking to make an impact, and looking to address some of these shortcomings or this juncture between young people being politically engaged and the harmful consequences of social media. But there's still much more to be done. I think it's still quite fragmented. So it's not that there aren't good things happening, but there's still a need for it to be joined together, and there's still a need for the kind of digital media literacy plus more formal aspects of citizenship to be dealt with collectively. So for me, and really just to echo the previous sentiment, Vote 16 as an initiative, I mean, are 16-year-olds prepared to, politically kind of engaged enough to be able to vote at 16? Yes. They're already using digital spaces to engage effectively and to shape their kind of political views and civic voices. It's society's job now to make sure that the infrastructures and our kind of societal infrastructures and frameworks are also equipped to make sure that we can make the most of that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Emma. And on to Hattie.
So hi everyone, my name is Hattie and I'm the director of an organisation called the Politics Project, and we do lots of work across the UK in schools, in youth groups, supporting young people to use their voice in different ways. So we do a lot of training, we develop resources, all sorts of things to help people to engage with politics and democracy. As well as that, just to mention my other hat, we're also the conveners of a network called Democracy Classroom, and I'm going to largely be talking about some of the experiences from that, because the Democracy Classroom network is a collection of about 100 organisations from the education sector, from the youth sector, and from the democracy sector, who all come together, particularly around elections, but also around some of the recent things like Vote to 16 and the curriculum review, to look at what we can do collectively to support young people to engage in politics and democracy. So there's a statistic which came out of an Ipsos Mori poll, which came out just after the 2024 election, which kind of keeps me up at night a little bit. And it was the proportion of young people who are in the social group DE, which means kind of the kind of less economically advantaged group. It's kind of the social sciencey way of saying it. Does anyone want to guess what the proportion of people that age who were 18 to 25 voted in the 2024 election? Any guesses? Does anyone want to shout out a guess? Zero. Ooh, a little bit too low. And 5%? It was 22%. So which is pretty low, right? So about 1 in 5 people voted in that age group. And that was a real drop. So from the 2019 election, that's a drop of, it was around 40 in that election. And so that's a significant drop down. And so in some ways that stat kind of symbolises the problem for me that we've currently got, is that kind of real mass disengagement with politics amongst young people. And there's fantastic work happening, to come on to the question about citizenship. Is citizenship education up to scratch? I'm going to have kind of 2 answers to that. When citizenship education is delivered, is it up to scratch? Yes, it's great. Citizenship education can be completely transformational in schools, and it can do something that is called kind of, at the moment, the biggest indicator of whether or not you'll engage as a young person in politics and democracy, whether you'll vote, how you feel about society, is all to do with your parents. The parental impact is by far the biggest one. But citizenship education can equal that out. So which is an incredible thing. So it can mean that young people that don't have politically engaged parents can get involved in politics and can engage. So the work that Hans is doing, those 30 teachers who are going to be working, they're going to be doing amazing things in their schools. The problem is that it's just not really being delivered enough. And so in some ways, the question around this is actually, how do we get citizenship education to be implemented? So it's not about citizenship education, good or bad, it's is it happening and how do we get it to be happening? And the big show in town at the moment is Vote to 16. That's the thing that the government care about, and that's the thing that has actually probably done the movement to get citizenship into the curriculum and assessment review, that it's seen that if you're going to give 16-year-olds the vote, schools need to play a part in supporting young people to learn about citizenship and politics in schools so that they're going to be voters. Because there is one number that the government care about in terms of Vote to 16, and it is the turnout of 16 and 17-year-olds in the 2028 election, which is likely to be the first Vote to 16 election. So if a student is in year 9 at the moment, they're going to be able to vote when they're in year 11. I don't know how many of you know year 9s. Do we think they're super ready to become voters? And the slightly scary thing is, guess what's about to happen? They're about to start their GCSEs, so they're all about to be very difficult to reach. So I'm a little worried about the short-term implementation of Vote to 16. And the other thing, just to say on that implementation point, is that all these fantastic changes that should be coming in the curriculum assessment review that we're really excited about, they are due to come in September 2028. When is the first Vote to 16 election likely to happen? May 2028. So those changes won't even have necessarily been in place in time for Vote to 16. So there's a lot to do in terms of implementation. So I'm just going to get my notes. So delivery is an issue, and kind of how do we get there? So I'm just going to talk through a couple of the things that we are looking at and kind of calling for to kind of practically get us on that roadmap to being able to have more citizenship education happening in spaces. We just did a piece of work in Wales where we got together with loads of other organisations who are also doing delivery in Wales, and we for the first time, as far as we're aware, all shared information about which schools we were working with and where we were working, because we'd never done that before, which sounds obvious, but are we all going to the same schools because there's a keen teacher that's saying yes to everybody coming in? Yes is the answer to that question. So there were 30 schools that had had more than 10 engagements from us collectively, and there were 30 schools who had had 0 engagements from us collectively. And so we looked at the different demographics of those 2 different groups, all secondary schools, and what we found was that the biggest indicator that was the biggest change across the 2, really, really stark, was the proportion of students with free school meals. So, and that was schools with higher proportions of free school meals were less likely to be engaging with the kind of collective support that we were offering in Wales. And in some ways that's extra worrying because we know from research that students who have free school meals are less likely to be getting support to learn about the world and learn about citizenship at home. So we've got to do things to equal that out. So one of the things we're doing is trying to continue that tracking, trying to not all work in the same places, trying to work out where we're not working and try and work in some of those spaces while we can. The other thing that we're calling for and that we're working with government on at the moment is seeing if we can convince every school in the UK to have a named person who is responsible for democratic engagement. In a lot of schools that will be a fantastic citizenship teacher, but in other schools that are kind of on the journey to figuring out what they're doing about that, they need somebody who's senior, who's going to hold this. If you're a 16 to 18 provision space, so if you're a further education college, all of a sudden you're going to have candidates wanting to come onto your campus and when you've had votes of 16 and talk to you about politics. You're going to have to figure out what to do about that. You're going to have to figure out how to safeguard young people in those situations. We're going to have a situation, we're going to have voters who are going to be 16 and safeguarding rules in schools that are going to go up to 18. All of that needs to be figured out. There's loads and loads to do. And then finally, just to mention a piece of work that we're doing just to kind of draw all of this together, which we're doing with the Electoral Commission, is that over the next year, we are developing what's called a democratic education framework. Sounds very nerdy. I'm very excited about it, so be excited for me. And what that is designed to do is to really look at this idea of citizenship or democratic education and think about what needs to be happening in different spaces and what can be done well in different spaces so that we can kind of deploy our work as kind of efficiently as possible, and then developing some really good pathways for different spaces so that we can go on a journey with them from where they currently are, which is 0 delivery, to somewhere which is where we would like to be, which is having a trained citizenship teacher in their classes, so that by the time we get to 2028, we can have a lot more people delivering and doing more of that work. And just finally to say, I think sometimes we put a huge amount of pressure on schools to be the sole holder of this, but I think we've also got to look at the wider environment for young people. What are political parties doing to engage young people? Very, very little. If there's no one communicating with you in a way that you want to be communicated with, are you going to engage? Are you going to feel comfortable engaging? One of the things that we're looking at when we look at mis and disinformation, I think sometimes we put too much pressure on young people to say, we're going to arm you with all the tools to go out there and understand deep AI fakes, can't say that word, and you know, work through this absolute morass of everything that's going on in social media. We also need to provide safe havens of information that we can point young people to and we can point all citizens to, which are going to be, if you go to this place, you're going to be able to find out information about what's going on in politics, whether that's the structures, the rules, or whether that's learning about candidates, parties, things like that. Has anyone in this room read a manifesto end to end? Probably. Oh, we've got one. I was about to say, maybe Alan, you've read a manifesto end to end. But yeah, some of this infrastructure is not fit for purpose. So loads in there, loads of different things we can do. But yeah, citizenship education, great when it happens. How do we make sure it's happening a little more?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hattie. So much interesting material and valuable material from all 3 contributions there. We will come to your questions in just a little while, so do be thinking about those questions. But let's have a little bit of a conversation to pursue some of the themes that you've talked about there a little further. Hans started us off with a little bit of research into what an audience of predominantly young people think. I wonder if we know more about what young people think about what citizenship education they should be getting and what citizenship education they're currently getting. I suspect we'll get questions that manifest some views on this in a little bit, but do we have research on these matters that we can pick up at the start? Hans, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. The Association for Citizenship Teaching has done research into this with Middlesex University and Royal Holloway University and Nottingham Trent University. I have to remember all of them. And those schools who talk about citizenship education, those schools who teach it, as Hattie was saying, teach it very well. And perhaps when I was booming on about that it's not up to scratch is because I've seen such high quality citizenship education that is transformative. And children then talk about how it's changed their life goals, their life perspectives. There's a video online from Hamilton Academy in Leicester, and the children there created the video and talk about how it changed their lives and all the people that they met, from refugees to homeless people, worked with European ministers and all sorts of people. And that's a inner city school that has high pupil premium, high free school meals. So when young people are asked, they talk about the power of it. The problem is, as we've referred to, there are so many places that don't have any citizenship education. It's blended into other subjects. It's confused with personal social health education. It's confused with other personal development areas. And then children say it's, I can't think of a better word, crap, rubbish. It's pointless. Why are we doing it? And that is the problem, trying to change those perspectives.
Emma, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from a digital perspective, I think in terms of what young people are saying when we've gone into schools is, the word distrust comes up quite often. You mentioned distrust right at the beginning. And I think you're right in the sense that we can equip young people with the tools to, critically think about what they're engaging with, and all of these things. But ultimately, they need to get their information from somewhere. And in terms, where that comes from and what that information is, I think from what young people are saying, like where can you go for that, and how can you trust that information? So yeah, that's really important.
I'm going to mangle these stats because I don't have them in front of me, but there's poll after poll after poll that says that young people want to be taught about politics and democracy in schools. It comes up a lot. And I think one of the kind of most nuanced things about the Vote to 16 debate is that if you ask young people, do they want Vote to 16, there's often like a 50-50 split on whether or not young people want Vote to 16. But if you ask young people, if you kind of unpick why young people don't want Vote to 16, a lot of the time it's because they feel like they haven't been taught about politics. And if you say to them, if you were taught about politics, before your Vote to 16 election, would you want to vote at 16? That number is much, much higher, the number of young people that want it. So yeah, it comes through a lot in a lot of polling. You'll see a lot of kind of national campaigns from people like the British Youth Council, UK Youth, those sorts of people. One of the key things being about politics and democracy education in schools. So it's something that we see a lot. We have a lot of young people who are our allies in this conversation that want to be taught about it.
Fantastic, thank you. And let me ask a little bit more than you've already said about what we should be aiming for. So I think there's consensus on quite a few points among you here. So there's consensus that citizenship education is a good thing, and that it should be delivered universally, and that it should be delivered in academies, and the sort of inequalities of provision that Hattie brought out very clearly should be addressed. And I think there's agreement that that requires specialist trained teachers in order to get there. I wasn't quite clear what your thinking is on whether we've got the curriculum itself right as yet, or whether that also needs some attention. I was maybe hearing Hattie and Hans tending to suggest that where we are is great, it's just that it needs to be delivered and delivered well, whereas I thought Emma was maybe suggesting there are more problems in the existing curriculum that need to be addressed. So I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that. Hattie, do you want to start us?
Yeah, sure. I would say I think I would make changes to the existing curriculum, but I would much rather it was delivered than not. I think the big change I would make is learning more about local government and regional government. For almost all young people, their first vote, their first engagement with politics is going to be a local government election or regional election. They just happen more frequently in most parts of the country, so it's more likely. But also your opportunity as a citizen to engage politically is far, far greater at a local level or at a regional level. And I think it makes, a lot of the work that we do is trying to help young people see that they can make a difference and that politics is something that they can influence. And just thinking of politics as this big fighting match that's happening on TV between national politicians can be quite disempowering. So trying to understand a bit more about the local is actually the place I would start, because it's much more kind of tactile. You can get into your local councils, you can meet local councillors, you can kind of experience that side of politics a bit more.
So this is not to knock anything that is on the curriculum, and I think the review is great in that it does obviously recommend these kind of important digital aspects as well. I think it's more of, we've already mentioned specialist teachers, but also that it needs to kind of meet young people where they are. And this is really tricky because obviously curriculums take time to implement. And by the time you've done that, especially in the world of social media, things have moved on. So, it's not to say that the curriculum at one point or at any given time isn't good enough or isn't doing the job that it needs. But we're in a kind of really rapidly evolving world, and the curriculum, I think, needs to find some way of addressing these challenges that are constantly evolving. And I think with regards to that, even with the best training in the world for citizenship specialists, by the time they've been into schools and teaching for a few years, and we know that young people are kind of really quick at evolving and kind of keeping up with the latest things online that teachers don't have spare hours a day, a week, even a month, to also be trying to do this. And what's the easiest way to kind of to get over that? And that's probably just to ignore, to put your head in the sand and to ignore some of these issues that are happening. I think if we think back to, we've probably all seen Adolescence, that was on Netflix 6 months ago, the complex reality of how young people are communicating, and the types of things that teachers need to know if they are going to be the kind of gatekeepers or the key people who are delivering citizenship curriculum in a rapidly evolving digital world. So for me, it's not that the curriculum isn't up to scratch per se, but I do think that this kind of the speed and evolution of the way that we interact and young people interact and receive political content does need to be considered within that framework as well.
Thank you very much. So I agree with what's been said. I would like to add that when we develop student teachers to teach citizenship, we're not thinking about the curriculum now. We're not thinking about the curriculum in the past. We're thinking about the curriculum in the past, the curriculum now, and the curriculums of the future, and beyond the 2028 curriculum. We're thinking about how teachers of citizenship learn to see the world through a citizenship lens, so that whatever comes up, they can adapt to it. Citizenship teachers are constantly adapting and evolving to the world around them and the news and the aspects that they need to learn about because of the nature of the subject. So specialist teachers are given those skills to do that, and then enabling young people to develop the skills of deliberation and sitting with difficult things, having conversations with people that you don't necessarily agree with, but also you're not sure that you fully understand what they're saying, and feeling okay that there isn't always a clear answer. So some of these very complicated areas that we're talking about in the curriculum in terms of generative AI and all of those things, I don't have the solutions for those things. And I think it's more important to be honest with young people as a teacher that these are evolving circumstances, and then learn from the young people about what we need to do collectively as a society to improve things like social justice, to improve things like safety. The Demos report talked about one of the number one things that young people talk about is knife crime. Why are politicians not doing anything about it? It's become a public health emergency. So the curriculum is a vehicle for learning about certain content and certain skills. Is the curriculum right now currently effective? I would say not. That's why we've had the curriculum assessment review. Will it be effective in 2035? Because who knows how long it will take for another curriculum review? No. So it's about constantly evolving and developing teachers who are able to respond effectively to what's out there. I'll just say one more thing. We don't give teachers enough credit. Teachers work extremely hard to continually develop their content. Teachers are leaving the workforce in mass. Why is that? Because they're not given the autonomy that they should. They're not given time to specialize. They're not given time to develop their career paths. So they leave and go and work somewhere else. We need to harness that resource that we've invested in and keep them in the workforce and help them help themselves in terms of the curriculum and other aspects.
Great, thank you. I have lots more questions that I could ask, and I might come back in a little bit, but I'm really keen to bring your questions in as well. So let's do that now. Given that we have only one functioning microphone in the room, I think the sensible thing is that we don't attempt to send the microphone all the way around the room and then back to the front again here, but rather if you can try to speak up when you ask your questions, and then I will repeat the questions as best I can for the benefit of the video, so that people watching the video can know what the questions are as well, and then we'll go to the answers. So who would like to start us off with some questions? I see someone in a black jumper. I can just see a black arm, black jumper arm right in the middle. Yeah. Sorry, I could just see your arm. I couldn't see you. Great, thank you. So how can we ensure that teaching, particularly in primary schools, when citizenship education is developed there, is impartial and teachers aren't imparting their own views? Great question. There was another hand I saw around here, I think. Yes, red jumper this time. Fantastic. So is introducing citizenship nationwide, is it financially viable given the underfunding of the education system? And person in, now I can see a sort of grey-coloured arm there, yeah. Fantastic. So does social media consumption lead to the rise of the right wing, especially in young people? Emma, you haven't had the chance to start us off in any of these rounds so far. I think I won't attempt to direct you in what questions you're going to answer, so feel free to pick up any of the questions. Don't feel you have to answer all of the questions in your response. But Emma.
Thank you. I'll take the social media correlation with right-wing question. It's a really interesting question. The research is still emerging. I think the natural answer, or the natural assumption or perception is that there is some kind of correlation. We only need to look at real life events and think about the kind of political actors that have really gained a voice on social media to make that correlation, and that's not just in the UK, not just in the US, but globally as well. I think when we think of kind of right-wing and populist politics, the way that social media works algorithmically, driven by user behavior, I think those kind of views that are often more extreme and more sensationalized probably do find a home on social media platforms. But again, that's just one side. That's just one side of it, and I think there's not necessarily a huge overriding body of research that and the use of the word correlate is quite a strong term as well. I think the research is still open. The other flip side of that is recently we have seen social media being seen as a driving force in non-right-wing politics or more democratic politics in the US. If we look at Zohran Mamdani's success, I think there will be politicians that are kind of looking at that as a blueprint or a framework for, driving political engagement in young people. So I think whilst certainly the most common perception is that social media and right-wing politics are a good match, I think it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll try and roll together the question on impartiality and the question on money. I spend a lot of time talking about money. That's what happens when you're director of an organisation. The best bet on the money point is to align this as much as possible with Vote to 16. And the message we're giving to government is, if you don't fund this, Vote to 16 is going to be a disaster. And Vote to 16 is your main policy for young people. That's the very blunt conversation that we have sometimes with that. Yeah, there is funding that's needed. But I think the other thing to say in this agenda is that the way things work in schools is about what is a priority at any one point. So can we push it up the pecking order? Can we make it something that's given more classroom time, but is also given more attention on things like teacher training days? Can we make it more of a priority in that way? And there's actually quite a lot of signalling that the Department for Education can do to help with that. And in some ways that actually links to some of these points about impartiality. A lot of schools are really scared of delivering some of this stuff because they're worried they're going to be accused of being partial. And as much as the government and as much as organisations we work with, like the Electoral Commission, can give support and guidance, but can also say, no, it is your duty to talk to young people about social and political issues. You should be having these conversations. You should be equipping them. You can actually give a lot of teachers and schools the confidence to do this. And I think something that hasn't really been talked about, our engagements with teachers, are that teachers want to be talking about this. They want to be teaching it. It's stuff that's coming up naturally. And what they're kind of lacking is some of the support. Sometimes they're not quite sure how to do it, but also they're lacking the time to do it. So there's actually, given that we're in quite a low place, there's quite a lot that some gentle signalling could do to kind of unlock quite a bit on that point. But not to talk too long, but there's two other pieces of legislation that are going on at the moment, along with the curriculum assessment review. One is an elections bill, which is Vote to 16 is going to be in, and that's being done by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And then there's also a reform in the youth space, which is the youth strategy that's was supposed to be out in the autumn. See if that's going to happen. And in there as well, there's going to potentially be some provision on democratic engagement and what can be done in those spaces. And there's basically a question, as all of that goes through Parliament, all three pieces of work, can we get the government to commit more money to these bits? So we're not giving loads and loads and loads to schools and civic society organisations to do without any additional funding.
Thank you. I don't need to talk about the finance thing. Thanks, Hattie. For the political indoctrination question, because this is the thing that I'm asked about a lot. The first thing I'll say is when we're talking about primary schools delivering citizenship education, the question hasn't been resolved who is training the primary school teachers to deliver citizenship education and who are the primary school teachers who are going to teach citizenship education in primary schools. I've gone on about that, but let's park that there. there is the Education Act 1996 that prevents people from politically indoctrinating others, especially teachers. So this is law that teachers have to follow. That there's also the Equality Act 2010 that it requires teachers to think about a broad spectrum of people and teach all those people and think about all those views. So teachers under their teacher standards have to follow the law. So if a teacher is politically indoctrinating a child, the school has to intervene in that and deal with that in any performance management type of thing that they would have to do, because teachers aren't allowed to do that. However, I can think of teachers who try to do that to me. I'm sure you can all think about teachers who constantly talk about their political views. That's again why we need specialist teachers to give the range of perspectives on different issues. Often there's this idea that teachers should be neutral. I don't think that's possible. We are all human beings, right? We all have our different views, but it's about talking about a range of balanced perspectives while also keeping within the law. So a teacher could never give balance to issues of, for example, around the Equality Act. You couldn't say, well, there's these other views that are against the Equality Act and that's good and bad. That's not appropriate. So we have to follow the law, but we also have to think about why different views exist in the world. And at the moment, there's many places schools are not talking about these issues at all. Let's take Gaza. When war started, schools were saying, you're not allowed to talk about this with young people. And I was saying, if schools are saying to children, you're not allowed to talk about this, and no one in that school is talking about that as a teacher, who's talking about that to young people? Phones, right? Social media. And then the perspective of the right wing and all this comes in. And no one's addressing it. And then slowly schools started to change that policy. And then I heard a great example, I think is problematic, a great example, of a school saying, right, no teacher can talk about this except the citizenship teacher. And that was a school of 2,000 children. So suddenly the citizenship teacher, one person in that school, had to deal with 2,000 children asking questions. That's problematic, right? So we need more voices. Of course, I talk about specialist teachers of citizenship, but we need more voices to learn about how to teach controversial issues, to counter conspiracy theories online, and so on. And one of the things in relation to digital media that we were talking about just before is we need to teach teachers how to use digital media. We need to teach teachers how to use generative AI. The amount of conversations with people about the danger of generative AI, and I say, have you used it? No, but it's beyond me. Well, how can you have that conversation? How can you make that assumption? So generally, I hope I've answered all of those questions in some shape or form.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Let's have a second round of questions. Ooh, lots of hands this time. I see someone in a kind of almost white, creamy coloured jumper this time. I'm going with jumpers today. Very interesting. So could improved citizenship education address turnout inequality in elections? Or are the divisions already ingrained before too early for it to make a difference? Thank you. And red jumper? Great questions. So at what age should citizenship education be implemented, and what should we do less of in order to make space? And person in the pink tie. So social media, is that creating a new class divide because of disparity in media literacy and education around media literacy? Gosh, what good questions. Who would like to start this time? Hattie, you're looking very keen.
I'm desperate to slag off some subjects. No, I'm kidding. The question about turnout, Yeah, we hope so. I think that's the case. So a lot of the indicators for turnout are around kind of socio-economic factors. They're the same, they're a lot of the reasons. And as I mentioned earlier, there is research that good citizenship education can be an equalizer of those issues when it's taught well. So there's definitely the potential for it. The problem at the moment is it seems that at least from our work, is that schools where they have higher proportions of young people who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are doing less citizenship education. So in some ways, it's kind of the provision is going in the wrong spaces. We know, for example, that private schools deliver far, far more of this stuff than state schools do. So, but we would hope so. Hans might know some more specific stats on citizenship as a subject, but that yes, it should. That's the plan. That's the hope. There isn't kind of enough happening at the moment for it to show up in any kind of significant way in polling. What age do we think that citizenship education should happen, and what are we getting rid of? Very exciting. I think we kind of think of this as, ideally it should be happening the whole way through school, but we're also like, so that's where we want to get to. That's the perfect answer. If we win that fight, that's great. It's happening from primary school all the way through, and probably kind of accelerating a little bit towards when around your first voters, so you're kind of properly supported around your first vote. But I think we also think about it of like, what we really want to think about is what is like a minimum guarantee that people need on this. What is the minimum that you need to be able to engage and to be a voter? Because if we're not going to win the fight to get an hour a week the whole way through school, say, what is the thing that we want to get to everyone? And one of the things I slightly worry about is if it's seen as an option, democracy shouldn't really be an option that you take in school. It should be something that everyone has access to. So there's some of those issues. What subjects are we going to take some stuff away from? I think actually there's so much in the social sciences space where all of the skills that you're learning are the same skills that you could be learning in citizenship. So I would probably take some content out of history. Controversial, I know. Fewer kings and queens, please. But you could learn about, you can be learning about, it's almost like you're learning about current history, right? So in Scotland, they have this subject called modern studies, right? That's the kind of equivalent of that, doing a little bit of that. So I think there's ways that you can maybe rearrange the time that you're spending on some social sciences so that you're spending a bit more time looking at contemporary politics, contemporary systems in that space. I've got some controversial views on geography, but we won't go into those. Is it a subject? Question mark. Sorry.
I don't know. Yeah, so just to echo some of that, really, I think obviously Ofsted's kind of vision is a broader curriculum, and I don't know where that sits necessarily with taking time from the core subjects English, maths, and science, but I do agree that there is already lots of space in the curriculum where these conversations can happen. But the flip side of that is obviously if they've been taught in curriculum areas, then are they still being taught by citizenship specialists? So that's a logistical kind of question for schools to work around. But I think schools are already, certainly from my experience in the schools that I've been in, they're already teaching things like PSHE through a combination of science, biology, drama in some cases. So there's clearly time in the curriculum for things that schools prioritise or are told to prioritise, and that goes back to Hattie's point earlier about who is going to make this a priority, and obviously that goes with all the funding questions as well. To take the question about social media being a great equaliser, it certainly has the potential to. The issue is, and you're absolutely correct to kind of talk about a new divide. We're already seeing conversations about digital poverty. Certain group communities, whether it's infrastructurally because the geographical area doesn't have the infrastructure, or economically, we already know that students that have free school meals at school tend to have poor outcomes in many different ways, and digital poverty, if it's not addressed, could just become another element of that. I also think that schools often, particularly academies perhaps, respond to the context that they're in. and I mean kind of geographical context and with that as well. So I do think we're not only at risk if we don't address it of like a digital divide or a digital economic divide, but also a regional divide where if the kind of provision isn't centralised, that we are having large areas of the country having a different type of digital kind of digital literacy focus than others, and obviously that just exacerbates inequalities. So I think there's lots of things to think about from that aspect as well.
Thank you. I just looked at my notes and thought I can't remember the question. So if I've made a mistake, please correct me. Could it improve turnout and aspects like that? I think that Hattie has really given a lot of thought about how to do that. But I also think that I highlight this report that I mentioned at the intro speech, Demos report, Inside the Mind of a 16-year-old. I was actually blown away by the easy accessible nature of reading that report and what it says about young people across the country. And in the report, it highlights that 65% of young people do say that democracy is the best form of government, it was like 20% or something who are unsure. Now, if that's what they say, why is it that we're assuming there's some people constantly use this problematic statement, young people all want an authoritarian dictatorship? Well, that's nonsense, right? So in terms of that, we need to ensure that children from all age ranges have access to political education, citizenship education, democratic education, understand their rights, understand the media and so on. And that goes beyond 16. It goes into post 16, into further education, into university education. It's a lifelong endeavour. So I think that's the other aspect to talk about there. What do we cut? Now, in another role, I'm deputy programme leader for secondary PGCE. I could never say anything about cutting any of the other subjects. What I think is more important is that we start thinking about what is school for. We've spent 150 years doing a hidden curriculum about teaching people how to fit into society and do jobs that currently exist right now. Well, we know that jobs are constantly evolving. We're constantly assessing children from a very early age. Ken Robinson, the late Ken Robinson, talked about the problem of assessment in primary school, and that kills creativity. So I do think that even though the Curriculum Assessment Review for 2028 is already increasing assessment, we do need to generally think about what are we assessing and why are we assessing it, and is assessment always equitable? Does assessment always treat everyone in the same way? So what I would cut is a lot of the assessment that happens, and I would say the assessment also includes the assessment at a teacher level. Teachers are so accountable to so many things that they don't need to be, and while Ofsted has reformed in some way, I do think more reforms should be thought about, and there are models of system accountability in other countries that aren't as problematic as Ofsted. So I would talk about that. I hope that I answered everything. What do we cut? Did I answer everything?
The question of at what age should citizenship education start?
School. 4. That's the end of that.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to that one. I mean, the recommendation that you know it's starting to be taught in primary school, I think is great, and I think especially when we consider school is supposed to be kind of an equalising factor rather than a divider. What better place to start having those conversations than when students are young? I think it's great.
Same.
Great, which also gets to the question about, is there a danger that education comes in too late to affect turnout. That if citizenship education is starting very early, then hopefully those effects can come through. Let's try to squeeze in one final round very quickly. If we have quick questions and quick answers, then hopefully we can do it. And I will come to a few questions nearer the front this time. So, Meg, can I see your hand up? Great, thank you. So we have the problem that we don't have enough teachers, but the curriculum review is going to increase demand for teachers. How do we deal with that urgently? Which actually was a question that very close to something that I was going to ask as well, which, Hattie, you said that you have been saying to government that if you don't do this stuff, then votes at 16 is going to be a disaster. But a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about is long-term stuff. So what are the measures that can be implemented? And it'd be really interesting to hear all of your thoughts on what can be done in the next 2-3 years to make a difference. And just in front of Meg.
You kind of half stole my question. How do we plug that gap in specialist teachers? I am a history teacher with a combined teachers for profession through Citizenship PGCs.
Great, thank you. Sounds like you're partly answering the question that I had as well. So how do you upskill and support non-specialist teachers, but who do have the passion and at least some of the knowledge in order to plug this gap? And, let's do two more then. Okay, so gentleman here and then person here. Fantastic. So two questions there, really. Firstly, schools can't do everything here. So how can we enable parents and society more generally to pick up here? And also, how do we sort out the fact that the older people no is necessary? And then final point to you.
Are there any case studies or international examples of where citizenship education is delivered really effectively in Europe or further afield that we can learn from in the UK?
Fantastic. Are there examples from Europe further afield where this does work that we can learn from in the UK? So I shall start with Hans and we will move back down to this end. And this is going to be the final round. Ooh, and you've got 1.5 minutes each, okay? So let's see what you can do.
You're going to have to cut me off. Okay, I'll be quick. In terms of upskilling the general public, Alan will be happy about this. There's an event next Thursday in a community. Kensington Chelsea Libraries is doing a what is citizenship education? What can you learn about democracy for the general public? We need more of those kind of events. Adults also don't have a lot of citizenship education knowledge, as we said, so we need to go into the communities, into community centres and work with all sorts of NGOs to deliver this and think about rights and local examples and dealing with inequalities. In terms of citizenship education teachers, go to the Association for Citizenship Teaching website. There are loads of resources, CPD available, loads of ways to upskill the current teachers into second specialist subjects. I would say that I'm a trustee, but please do it. It's very valuable. In terms of the investment for teacher education, I've spent a lot of time trying to campaign for government to invest in this. Last year, Keir Starmer, who is the local MP for the area that UCL Institute of Education is in, said that government would resource the area, would spend time and money in this area. We wait to see where it's coming from.
Okay. Yes, just to echo some of those, really. I mean, obviously, teaching is in a crisis anyway. So to attract and retain teachers on top of that is a big ask. I will say that I think Votes at 16 has come at a great time in order to start having those conversations. Schools have a reason now in order to start allocating the resources they do have, or being kind of driven by the government in order, whether it's funding or provision, in order for schools to help address that. So I would hope that kind of marks a bit of an urgency in helping schools address that. In terms of upskilling teachers, I think, obviously, they're going to need some CPD. I think some careful thought has to go into how that's delivered and who delivers it. The kind of age-old scenario of all teachers kind of been stuck in a hall on a Monday at 3:30 to 4:30, half asleep. It is not going to cut it. So I think upskilling is great, and there are so many enthusiastic teachers that, like you mentioned earlier, really want to have these conversations and really want to make a difference. But obviously they can only do that if they've been upskilled. In response to your question, I don't know anything that has been published. Bath University are just about to embark on a really big cross-comparative study of European countries and digital civics. It's got a kind of more digital kind of focus, but might also be relevant for citizenship as well.
Thank you so much.
Yes, so I guess I can try and wrap all of that up together by saying Vote to 16 is going to have to be a coalition of the willing. If you've got parents that want to get involved, get involved. If you've got youth practitioners that want to get involved, if you've got teachers that want to get involved, that's the only way it's going to get there. And I think one of the things we are doing a lot of thinking about is if there's limited resource and limited energy, how do we work together most effectively to spread all of that out? Definitely CPD in schools is a part of that. And actually we've started work now with the Electoral Commission. We're going to be starting pilots after Christmas, preparing people for Votes at 16 so that we are ready, we have resources, we have content. We're not waiting until 2028. And I think waiting for the government to even decide what they're doing on this is going to mean that everything is too late, and we kind of are kind of looking at an advocacy track, but we're also looking at what do we actually need to get on and do right now, which is I think really, really important. And that's it. That's all I'm going to say.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Can I just say for the question? Sorry, I just wanted to apologise for not answering your question. There are many countries across Europe that teach citizenship education and teach it 10 times better than we have it and have resources. I can talk about a list of those countries afterwards.
Thank you so much. Sadly, we are out of time. So the first thing for me to say in conclusion is to tell you about next week in the Policy and Practice programme. So we have an event on civilian control of the armed forces, particularly focusing on the role of parliaments in the control of armed forces. And the format will be a little bit different from our usual. We'll have a new book on this subject will be presented by its author and then will be discussed by the author along with 2 other fantastic experts on this subject. So that will be taking place here next Thursday, the 27th of November, and you can sign up as usual on the UCL School of Public Policy and Department of Political Science website. But for now, that is it for this evening. So let me thank you all for coming. Thank you for so many fantastic questions. Really great to hear all of those. And please join me in thanking our wonderful panellists, Hans Svenevik, Emma Connolly, and Hattie Andrews. Thank you so much.